Here we have a Penguin engine that refuses to run. If I push the tickler button down to prime it, doesn't want to stay running. I've already done a little bit of diagnostics, and I pulled the air filter off, took the banjo fitting out. And what I found in the banjo fitting, you see it, there's some debris in the banjo fitting. Oh, the banjo fitting has a fine screen in it. So I'm going to see if maybe some of that has gone through and somehow ended up in the carburetor. So to do that, I'm going to pull the carburetor off. Hopefully this shouldn't take too long. Okay, so I have shut the fuel off. There's a clip here to pinch the fuel line off. I don't know if you can see it there. It's just a rubber hose and there's a clip to crimp it off. I'm just going to remove the air filter. Now, to get at the carburetor mount screws, which are back in here, we have to take the cooling shroud off. So to take the cooling shroud off, spark plug wire out of the way. Then we have to take the cooling shroud apart. There's one screw here. One screw back along here. It's going to come out, alright. That's another screw out. So then there's a nut on top of the right half of the cooling shroud. Take the nut and washer off. Try not to knock the camera over. So the right half of the cooling shroud will come up off the stud. Out. See, here's the front of the shroud. That's where the other screw was. Here's the one at the rear, right here. Now, this half of the cooling shroud should come up out. It's a little convincing. Hold the right way, or just say the right words under our breath here. Actually, I'm going to take the top disc off the carburetor here. We're going to take the carburetor off anyway. Just unscrew this top ring. Take the ring off. And then the disc with the choke and throttle slide here, slide out. Set that aside. Put this wiring down out of the way. Oh, and it'll almost come out. There we go. Thankfully the two screws here go in here, weren't there. Okay, now we can see the carburetor mount screws are here and here. Yes, we have to disconnect the fuel line here. We'll take the banjo bolt out. Take the banjo bolt out here. It takes the fuel line fitting off of the carburetor. There's a bolt here that goes through the banjo fitting with a fiber washer on either side. There's one fiber washer. And there's the banjo bolt and screen I mentioned earlier. Screen is clean. The fitting is clean. The bolt is clean, I'll just set that stuff all together. Set it out of the way. So the fuel line is wrenched off here. Just take that out of the way. And then we're going to take these two screws out. Oh, I got the right wrench. I have to use the British Standard wrench here. Now, the screw on this side is right near the fan housing, and this fan housing breaks very easily. So we want to be gentle here. We don't want to break this loose and break the casting. This penguin hasn't run. This penguin has not been run a lot, so it's possible that some of the loose material in the fuel tank that's been in there for years has finally started to work loose since I've been running this a bit. There's one screw out. So we're taking the carburetor off with the intake manifold. Because the carburetor will not slide rearward to come off the intake manifold because of the way it sits in the engine. So there we have the carburetor out. Set that back in place there while I get some rags to soak up a little fuel. I didn't get the carburetor apart while I was away. Okay, well I'll do it while I'm back then. Okay, so the carburetor is off of the engine, and there's probably a float bowl full of fuel. So put it into an approved container. Take the bowl nut off. Easier to do if I had the right wrench in my hand. I'm just going to take the bowl nut off here and drain the fuel into a clear container here, just to see if there's anything there besides fuel in the float bowl. Get the bowl nut right off here. Now, the bowl nut doesn't appear to have anything in it. Float bowl looks fairly clean. I don't see anything in there that should cause a problem. This is the main jet here. See anything on it that might cause a problem, but I'm going to take the main jet out. Actually, let's just check the now. There is some debris here, some yellow stuff. I don't know if that was in the float bowl or if I didn't get that out when I drained the line into this. I think it was from earlier, but anyway. See anything in that. I'm going to take the main jet out here carefully. There we go. Take the main jet out, it just unscrews. Try not to drop it. It looks clear. You can see through that. Where are we here? Yeah, we're going to see through that. See, the hole in that does not look perfectly round. So I'm going to take that to the compressor and blow it out. I'm going to take the float off. Take the float off. Float doesn't sound like it's got anything in it, so that's good. I take the inlet needle out here so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to take, this here we have the main tube. This is the inlet where the fuel from the banjo fitting comes in and the inlet needle goes in there. This is the tickler button. It just set it float back on there. It just pushes the float down. This is upside down to let fuel into the carburetor. So this is the pilot jet. This is the pilot screw to adjust the idle speed. Just going to take that out. Just unscrews and it should be clear. And I cannot see through that, so that's blocked. That may be why we're not having a happy engine here. Anyway, I'm going to take this carburetor to the air compressor, blow through the port here where the pilot jet was, blow back through the inlet fitting, just make sure the main tube is clear. It looks clear, and I will clean the main jet out. I'll be right back. Okay, so what I did was I took some solvent, some brake clean, which is just alcohol, squirted some in here, blew that out with air, compressed air, some in there, blew that out with compressed air, blew this out with compressed air, took the main jet. I could see through it, although it didn't look clean, so I took some alcohol, some brake clean, blew that out. And this, the pilot jet, I could not see through the hole. It's a very small hole. So I actually took a very fine wire after I had tried solvent a couple of times in compressed air, and just carefully put a fine wire in there, and then tried the solvent compressed air again, and now it appears to be clear. So I'll put this back together. First we'll put the pilot jet in. Now I did not take the pilot screw out. The pilot jet in, just turn it just snug. The inlet needle, put a pointy end down in the inlet there. Put the float back on. The float only goes on one way. It's actually marked bottom. Bottom is going to be up since the carburetor's upside down. And there's actually a reinforcing pad here where it sits against the float. The inlet needle. So put that on. And then we'll put the main jet in. Try not to drop it since we're working over the engine compartment here. Not the best place to do this, but... And that's jet in until it's just snug. It doesn't have to be really tight, just it doesn't, as long as it doesn't fall out. Okay, so again, just to see how this works. So the float rises, of course, in the carburetor as the float comes in, as the fuel comes in, and closes the inlet needle off. This is the fitting the banjo fitting goes onto. And if the engine's sitting there with fuel in the carburetor till the float is closed, pushing the tickler pushes the float down to let more fuel in. So, okay, so we're going to put the float bowl back on. So the gasket between the float bowl and the carburetor body is in good shape, and the fiber washer on the bowl nut is in good shape. So I'll just reuse those. kits of the gaskets are available for these actually. I have a couple here, but I'm just going to reuse what's on it because it's in good shape. Give this a quick wipe here. Well, it's easy to do that. Okay, now I'm going to set this back on the engine. Now there are two spacer gaskets here. They're stuck together, so I'm just going to leave them stuck together. Set the carburetor, the engine, put the spacers sort of in place. Start one of these in here. The holes in the gaskets slash spacers slash insulators to line up. There, one screw's going in. And see if this one will go in. We'd have to get things to line up. Screw this in by hand. This is faster than working on it with the wrench at that spot. And the British standard wrench I'm using says 3/16 on it. And if I take a 1/2-inch wrench, the 1/2-inch wrench is a little big. The 7/16, oh, just barely fits. So, not sure how the British standard wrenches are measured. And then snug those up, tightened evenly. Again, not overly tight. There are lock washers under these screws. This is the tough one to get onto without rounding it off. Get that one snug. Okay, so I'll put the banjo fitting back in that. So there's the fuel line. There's the banjo fitting. Banjo fitting with the filter screen and the fiber washer. Put that in. Put another fiber washer on it here. Feed it through where I believe it was before. Thread that in by hand, of course. Snug by hand. Turn it down so the fuel line is down against the transmission. That's the transmission on this engine. Snug this up again. Not really tight. Okay, so that's back on. So I'm going to be confident enough that I'm pretty sure that we found the problem. The blocked pilot jet. So I'm going to set this half of the cooling shroud back in. It's got to be set in over the there's a flange on the top of the fan here. Then I'm going to set the other half in place here. Now there's a stud on the cylinder head with a nut and washer on it to hold that, so I'll set that on. I'm just going to loosely put the washer on the cylinder head stud. Not just loosely, because we're going to have to wiggle stuff around here to get this screw started. Here's the screw. Goes in the back. This is going to be interesting. Not hard to see why some of these get left out. Trying to wiggle the two halves here to try to get the hole to line up. Again, I'm putting the shroud together on the engine because it's near impossible. Actually, I think it is pretty much impossible to get the shroud back on the cylinder and cylinder head when it's in one piece. It's almost impossible to get the screw back in the front of it here. Wow. I'm going to try putting the one in the back here first. See if that helps line the front one up. Okay, of course that was relatively easy. I could see what I'm doing there. I'm going to try this again. Maybe the other one will line up. Of course I could start the engine without this screw in. Worry about it later. And that's what I'm going to do. I will put that screw in. I'm just going to snug this screw up so it doesn't rattle out. Actually, snug that screw up. Hold the shroud down on the left hand side. I'm just going to try that. Front screw one more time. You can feel the hole in the outer part of the shroud, the right hand part of the shroud, but not, of course, in the left hand part. It doesn't feel like sliding up. I'm going to play with that later. So again, I'll just tighten this screw up. So nothing rattles loose. And with those wrenches. Okay, so put the throttle. Here's the throttle slide with that's the main needle. It's got a little bit of gunk on it, which I'm going to just clean off with my fingernail. That's not helping anything. So this throttle slide has a keyway in it, and there's a screw on the side of the carburetor that keys into. This is the choke slide. When you release the choke lever, this slides down here and of course blocks some of the air off from going in the carburetor. So this throttle slide will only go in one way. Okay, so now it's sliding in. Sometimes you have to use your finger to guide the main needle in. This top disc has a gasket underneath it, which we can't see probably, and there's a tab that it keys into. And that's in place. This top ring just goes on hand tight. Just going to turn the fuel on there, undo the clip. Spark plug wire back on. Oh, I did one thing wrong. At least one thing wrong. Took the throttle slide back out. These wires were tucked in behind the carburetor. So I'm going to put them back. The throttle slide back in. It should go easily. It shouldn't need to be forced. And the top ring, if it'll just cooperate and thread on here. There we go. It too should is just meant to go on hand tight. Okay, so the fuel is on. I don't know if we can see it, but if I push the tickler button, we should be seeing fuel come out the ports here. Fuel is on. There we go, there's a bit of fuel there. Okay, so I'm going to put the air filter on. There's a tab on the fuel filter, sorry, there, fuel filter, the air filter. The tab here, that faces up. Just set that on. Make sure it's right away. Snap the clips on. Turn the key and see what happens. That's running better. Try setting the pilot screw here. 1.5 turns out, half, 1.5. That's not the best idle. I'll play with that a little more, but at least now it's going to run. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit more. Now just a word here. The two cables here, of course, the black one is the choke. The gray one is the throttle. And the only idle adjustment on this, there's no idle adjustment screw. There's an idle mixture screw, which is the pilot screw. The idle speed is changed by adjusting the cable. That I shouldn't have to play with that because this was running okay before it started acting up. Anyway, I'm going to play with this a little bit off camera and see if I can get it idle better. I gave the pilot screw about another half turn in, and I think that idle will work for now. If I have to, I can adjust it a little more. But now I know it's going to run when I take it to the car cruise night tomorrow. Anyway, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments area below. Thanks for watching.